Reading Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 through 22, and God is instructing Moses to instruct Israel to build the Ark of the Covenant. It has some specifications for that. It's supposed to be 1.5 cubits wide, 2.5 cubits long. It's supposed to be made out of acacia wood with gold rings around it, and then also plated with the gold all the way around it, so it appears to be made of full gold. And inside, God says, put the ark of the testimony of God, which refers to his law. So inside the ark is to be the testimony. And sitting on top of the ark is to be the mercy seat with two cherubim looking in toward the mercy seat. Now, when I read this in Exodus, God instructing Israel to produce an icon that is to represent God and the work God is doing and the word that God has spoken, I immediately think about modern day conversations concerning Second Commandment violations. So we would say, maybe, or some people would say, that it is a Second Commandment violation to have icons in the church, to have images of crosses, to have any depiction of Jesus whatsoever. And these conversations have become more prominent because there are TV shows that depict Jesus. Now here, in this passage of Scripture, God is actually giving Israel instruction to produce an icon that actually represents his own presence, so that the people have something tangible to remind them about who God is, what God is doing, and what God has spoken. So God is not going to violate his own second commandment. There is a difference between an icon or an image or a depiction or a representation and an idol. Now, those things can become idols, but I think this really depends more on the motivation of our hearts than it does the image or the icon or the depiction or the representation itself. And so, if an icon or an image or a depiction or a representation causes me to dwell upon who God really is or who Christ really is. So I'm watching a TV show and there's a depiction of Jesus doing something in this TV show, and it causes me to say, and I go back to Scripture and I read about Jesus, and I'm praying to Jesus as a result of that, and I'm knowing like the real Jesus more as a result of that. That's probably not an idol. Now, it would be an idol if I saw this image, this representation, and I assume this representation is who Jesus is. And I depend on this representation to determine who I think Jesus is instead of knowing Jesus himself. Then this representation has actually kept me from Jesus. In that instance, it is an idol. So I think it depends more on the motivation of our hearts than it does an object or an image or an icon or a depiction, which are things that are in themselves amoral. They're just things, right? It is in how we treat them that produces sin or not, that causes us to break a commandment or not. Now, I also notice, like within this ark of the covenant, Israel is to place the law, and God calls it a testimony. What is this a testimony about? I remember as Exodus chapter 19, just after the Ten Commandments are given, Moses says, "Do not be afraid. God has not come," giving the law, right? God has not come for any other purpose, but for your good, in order to test you, so that the fear of God may be produced in you, and that fear of God will actually cause you to reject sin, not the law in and of itself. So the law was not given to make people righteous, and God here doesn't even call it a rule, right? He calls it a testimony. It is a testimony then about the character of God and what God is doing, which is why the mercy seat rests on top of the Ark of the Covenant. People will look at the law. The law will increase their transgression, right? It'll cause them to realize, I'm not perfect because I can't keep the whole degree of God's law. If this was a standard for righteousness, I would fall short, and then they would turn their eyes upward, looking from the law upward to the mercy seat. God saying, I am for my people, not against my people. And so, brothers and sisters, when we look at the law and we realize that we are incapable of being perfect, like God is perfect because we are people, we are not gods, then may we also lift our eyes to the mercy seat and realize that God is for us, not against us, that he is righteous and that he is good and that he is not interested in the destruction of his people.